Now let's look at this wonderful gospel passage, which is the story of Jesus beginning his ministry. Now just imagine he's just been baptized. He's been filled with this extraordinary power of the Spirit. Now just imagine him, if we can, as a model for us. So think of him as just a human being like us for a minute. So he gets all this power inside of him, and then he goes out into the desert. And he goes out for 40 days to begin his ministry, and he's tempted by the devil. But what's interesting is he's led there by the Spirit to be tempted by the devil. So it's like saying these temptations are essential stages of our growth toward being able to cooperate and live with and work with this divine Spirit inside of us. And there's 3 major temptations. The first temptation, the devil comes up, and it's not in this passage, but in the other gospel we have a clear indication of exactly how the temptations work. The first one is, see these stones? You know, you're God, you can do all this great stuff. Why don't you just turn them into bread? The next one is, you know, you have God on your side. You have angels taking care of you all the time. Why don't you get up on the highest part of the temple and jump off and see if God catches you, you know, and just do something like that and see if that works. And then the last one is to show Jesus all the magnificence of the world and all of its riches and power and things, and says, you know, I can give you all this. You can have all of this. You can be in charge of all of this and make all this work, you know. And every one of those Jesus turns down. So let's look at what they meant, what they represent. And hopefully not too oversimplified a way, I want to say this. The first temptation to turn rocks into bread is that temptation we all have to be comfortable and to be always satisfied. I want to use my energy and use my work and use my life, rather, to make sure that I am always comfortable and everything is the way I would like it to be. It's such a temptation. And you know, when you're talented and when you have gifts and when you're able to manipulate, well, let's not say manipulate, influence, when you're able to influence people, you know, you could be very successful in trying to create around yourself a perfect world. But God, Jesus says, no, I'm going to live by the Word of God, and that's what he's saying. I'm going to live in the truth. And one of the things we have to understand is if we're going to be alive and vital in this world, we have to work through those things that are so painful and so difficult. The discomfort is there because it is necessary for you and for me to go through it in order to change. We have to almost long sometimes to be dissatisfied in a situation that is stressful, because that's what brings growth. The second temptation, it seems to me, is to always be somehow in control. If you're going to determine how God is going to work in your life, if you're going to ask him to do this or ask him to do that spectacular thing, it's almost like Jesus say, they're saying to Jesus, you can do anything you want, so why don't you just, do some spectacular things, and then God will always take care of you. There's something in that for me that sounds like, control. And when you're losing control, when you don't think you have control, you can feel like something in you is being lost, but there's something so beautiful, so powerful about giving up control. Doesn't mean you give up working for things, you don't give up struggling to make things better, but you somehow don't have to be the one who makes it all happen. You don't have to be the center. You don't have to be the one. The last temptation of all these Lucifer showing all these beautiful things of the world and saying that God, Jesus, you could control the world, you could be the most powerful figure on the earth, and it's a temptation for power, and power is addictive, and more power you have, the more destructive you can be. So, how can you live in this world and be asked by God to be powerless? Still have influence, still have, really, you're still being used, but you are not the source of the power. You are not the source of the power. What an incredible invitation on the part of God as we read this story of the temptations of Jesus, that he's saying to us, look, if I'm asking you to give up always being comfortable and satisfied, if I'm asking you to give up control, if I'm asking you to give up being the powerful force that you sometimes feel you should be or want to be because it feels so good, and if you can feel that when I ask you to give up these things, I'm not destroying you. I promised I would never destroy you. I'm doing something that's going to feel at times like a death, like a destruction, like you're being robbed of everything that's you in terms of effectiveness. But if you can let go of those things, of needing things to be a certain way, of being in control, of being the powerful one, if you can let go of those things, I am going to show you something so beautiful, so powerful, so really wonderful. That's the challenge of understanding death and resurrection to me. In other words, there is a kind of death in all of that. There is a kind of, when you let go of power, when you let go of control, when you let go of having things the way you would like them to be in terms of you being comfortable, when you do that, that's an amazing kind of death. And that leads to the most extraordinary thing, the promised resurrection, the new life that God calls us into. I feel like I'm just... After, a lot of years on this earth, I just feel like I'm beginning to sense this. I'm beginning to understand it. I'm beginning to taste the beauty of what it feels like to be in situations where you're not the center and you're not in control and you're not being satisfied necessarily. But what you're doing is you're being present. You have a sense of something working through you. You have a sense of bringing this extraordinary power and presence of God into situations. And you see effectiveness way beyond anything that your ego or your will or your mind could create. What a wonderful, wonderful, joyous feeling to know we have that capacity to be so powerful without having to be the source of without us having to be the source of that power, without us having to be the source of things around us. To be with a person like that, to be with a person who is so gentle and easy with life and accepting and forgiving and patient, and oh man, it's like honey, To be with people that are upset and to be angry and to be vicious and competitive and always trying to force things to happen is anything but honey, So our challenge during this season of Lent is to do something, to put ourselves into an awareness of this great mystery. And I would say the key thing, and I don't know what you're planning to do for Lent, our tradition is always asking us to give something up, and it's certainly true that you have to, there is something in this dying process that has to do with giving up power, giving up control, giving up something like everything being the way we want it to be. But, could you find something that would trigger, or that would connect with one of these areas? Can you give up something that gives you a sense of being powerless? Can you give up something that gives you a sense of not always being in control? Can you give up something that is always seeking things to be a certain way? That would be a great discipline, a great way of opening yourself into this wonderful, holy, transforming season. I've always said that one of the things about Lent that's so powerful is that there's a life force out there, a grace flowing between us, where it's almost like this is the time that God is asking everybody to take a few moments. It's like he turns on some bright lights if there's been a real darkness in your life, and he says, let's just look at everything. Let's see where you are. Let's see how you're doing. But let's lay it all against one great mystery, the mystery of death and resurrection. The mystery of giving up in order to have, the image of dying in order to rise, the image of baptism, of coming into a new life. That's the challenge of this season. That's the prayer I have for you and for me, that we end up in a new place come Easter Sunday.